What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going over the second of our two-handed DPS builds. This is going to be the Stamina Templar. So two-handed builds on a Stamina Templar and a Stamina Sorc are probably going to be the most blanking on the word. It will provide the most parity between dual wield and two-hander, and that's mainly because both the Sorcs and the Templars don't really have a class execute. Stam DKs, they also don't have a class execute, but they have a lot of skills on their bars that they have to maintain, so it's a little bit tricky to kind of get it working properly. For Templars and Sorcs, getting it two-handed on either of those two classes actually is pretty dang close to dual wield. Dual wield still manages to pull out ahead just a little bit, mainly because they do get a little bit of additional crit chance with double daggers, as well as some a better penetration because they're able to get two sharpened traits versus just one weapon that two-handers have. But it's very, very close. Like I mentioned in the Stam DK video, the gap between two-handers and dual has shrinked quite a bit over the past few patches, and it's very, very apparent on Templars and Sorcs just how much that gap has closed. So like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. Much like our Stam DK video, I will kind of be glossing over the sets a little bit because a lot of the sets are pretty much the exact same thing as you would expect from your typical dual wield Stamplar video. So just check the description below for the specific sets that I'm going to recommend. I will really quickly go over some of my preferred replacements depending on whether you only have access to the base game and things like that. But we will kind of gloss over gear just a little bit because it's basically repeat information from the dual wield builds, and then we will be doing a 21 million dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS that the two-handed build is able to pull in comparison to the dual wield build. And I think you guys might be a little bit surprised at how close the two parses are going to end up being. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So the first two sets that we're going to be talking about, the Maelstrom set and the first of our 5-piece set, pretty much exactly the same between the dual wield build and the two-handed build. We're going with Velidreth and Relequen. Pretty much your cut and dry, your standard stamina DPS gear here. So we do have that one health enchant on the Velidreth, and that's partially because I am a dark elf. So if I was an orc instead of a dark elf, I would not need this max health enchant here. But if you are not an orc, then you will need that max health enchant on one of your large pieces. Doesn't really matter which one it is. It can be the helm, the chest, or the legs. The rest of the pieces all have max stamina enchants, and of course all divines, because Infused is significantly weaker on a stamina DPS than it is on like a Magicka DPS. Now our second set's going to be a little bit different. So I did test out Perfected Lokkestiiz, and I also tried out Tzogvin's. So the thing with Lokkestiiz is, if you're going to be using Lokkestiiz, you're going to have to end up probably using a sharpened two-hander as your front bar. You could possibly go with precise, but you will need to play around a little bit with your CPs. You might need to use something like one-piece Velidreth and one-piece Kra'gh in order to make up for the loss in penetration. Because Tzogvin does have, as the 4-piece bonus, additional physical penetration here. So really, really nice additional penetration there. It allows you to invest a little bit less into your overall piercing CP. So to kind of give you guys a perspective, if you have all the debuffs in the game, you still have to make up 5850 additional penetration. Now, the piercing CPs, if you have 100 points into it, will only add 5280 additional penetration. So if you're running something like Lokkestiiz and Relequen with 2-piece Velidreth, then you are not getting additional any sort of additional penetration out there. Even if you have 100 points into piercing, you'll still be short about 600 or so. So you will need to add in, at the very least, one armor bonus of physical penetration. So that's kind of, or you have to run sharpen if you run Lokkestiiz. So that's why I'm running Tzogvin's instead. I did test out both sets, and it did seem like they're very, very even with each other. But I prefer Tzogvin's here, just because it does allow us to use Velidreth. You don't have to necessarily worry about one-piece Velidreth, one-piece Kra'gh as you would like on a Perfected Lokkestiiz setup. Plus, it also allows us to use synergies on any bar, so we don't have to worry about bar swapping to our front bar to get synergies for the Lokkestiiz and Major Slayer uptime. Tzogvin's is also arguably a little bit easier to obtain. You do need to farm Frostvault in order to, get Tzogvin's. But if you're looking for Perfected Lokkestiiz, you're gonna have to do Veteran Sunspire, which, while it is not necessarily a very difficult trial, it might be out of reach for a couple of people, especially as you're just starting to get into the end game content. With Frostvault, at the very least, you can at the very least run it on normal to get armor, and then for Relequen, you can just run normal Cloud Rest, which is a lot easier, at least in my opinion, compared to like normal Sunspire. Normal Sunspire, you can run that for the non-perfect version of Lokkestiiz, which is still pretty strong, but at that point, Tzogvin does end up being winning out overall. So non-perfect Lokkestiiz does end up losing just a little bit compared to Tzogvin's. So I prefer running Tzogvin's here on this build. Jewelry traits, exact same as you would expect on a typical stamina DPS, so 3 Bloodthirsty or 3 Infused with weapon damage enchants. Then our front bar, we have a precise Greatsword. So Greatswords do end up pulling more consistent DPS compared to the Battle Axe. The Battle Axe, if you get good RNG on the bleed on the Battle Axe, does end up doing a little bit more DPS, but the Greatsword is going to be a lot more consistent. So we're going to stick with the Greatsword rather than the Battle Axe, but you can go with either one of them. We are still using Double Ravage Health poisons. If you don't want to use the poisons, you can just run a typical poison damage enchant instead. But you still want to go precise just because we do want to make use of the additional crit damage that we're going to get from the Shadow Mundus, so we do want to have higher crit chance in order to make use of that crit damage. And our back bar is still a bow, Maelstrom Bow, infused weapon damage enchant, nothing has changed there between the dual wield build here. So the major changes here are the fact that obviously we're running a two-hander and we're running a sword with precise instead of something like sharpened. Now if you are going to be using Lokkestiiz, then you will want to run sharpened if you're not going to be doing one-piece Kra'gh, one-piece Velidreth. It's just something to keep in mind there. The other sets that you typically would run on a dual wield build, Briarheart, Vicious Ophidian, Deadly Strikes, Stamina Templar in particular, those are all perfectly fine to use as well. Deadly Strikes, I would probably try to use it on the body set, so to be a replacement for Relequen. And the other sets, Briarheart, VO, you could run them on either body or the front bar sets there. So pretty much the exact same sets you would expect to see as a replacement sets on dual wield would be good on a two-handed build. The only inclusion here would be Tzogvin's. Instead of Lokkestiiz as your main set. For our character sheet, so I already mentioned this a little bit earlier, but orcs are going to be the best option, followed closely behind by the dark elves. So dark elves do get a little bit less max stamina, but they do get the 258 additional weapon damage. Orcs get the maximum 2000 max stamina, but they also get 1000 max health. So if you have the additional health, you don't need to put that additional health enchant on one of your large armor pieces, allowing you to get a little bit more extra stamina out of it. So orcs are going to be the best if you're just looking for raw DPS. Now, if you also want to use this character and play a Magic Templar on the side, so you want to flip-flop between the two specs, then the Dark Elves are going to be your best option because Dark Elves do get additional max magicka and spell damage as well. This particular build doesn't have that many issues with sustain, so I would not recommend necessarily going with one of the sustain races. So that would be the Red Guards and the Bosmer. You don't really need additional sustain on a Stamina Templar. At the very least, two-handed Stamina Templar, you shouldn't need additional sustain from a Red Guard or a Bosmer, but they are potential options. If you also want a tank on the side, then you might want to go with the Imperials if you have access to the Imperial Edition. They do get the max stamina and the max health, so really helpful for your overall survivability. You also get a little bit of additional sustain boost, but you don't get any of additional weapon damage, so it's not going to be quite as strong as the Orc or the Dark Elf in just terms of raw DPS potential, but it is a good option if you also want to play a Templar tank on the side. And if you do want to also flex around, be a tank or a healer or a magic or stamina DPS, basically you want to kind of dip your toes in all the different roles in the game, Khajiits are a pretty good sort of hybrid race there. So they do get bonuses to all three resources, and they get 10% additional critical healing and critical damage done. So overall pretty nice as a sort of jack of all trades race if you kind of want to go that route there. In terms of attributes, all of our points are into stamina here. If you are not an orc or an imperial, then you do not have any additional health passives from your racial, so you might need to put a couple of points into health if you feel like you need additional survivability. Right now, without any buffs, we're sitting at 15.9k health. When we have Ebon and when we have Toughness, that'll jump up to around 18k health. So perfectly fine for Vet Trials, even though it does seem a little bit low right now just because we don't have any of our buffs active. For our Mundus, we're still sticking with the Shadow, as you would expect, still the strongest Mundus in the game. And we're using Artaeum Takeaway Broth. This is for the additional sustain here. We do need to use Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Camoran Throne to sustain a full light attack rotation on the Stamina Templar. So just keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons why having an Orc is going to be really nice, because you don't get quite as much health using Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Camoran Throne compared to running something like Blue Food instead. Then we are a vampire. Vampires do get 10% additional stamina regen at stage 2, and you also get some additional damage mitigation through the undeath passive at stage 3. But you will end up taking more fire damage, and your health regen will be lower. So those are the trade-offs if you decide to become a vampire. As a melee DPS, you have less time to react to any sort of mechanics that might be happening in a fight. So just keep that in mind. You don't necessarily have to be a vampire, but the additional regen is definitely very helpful for a stamina Templar. Moving on to our skills. So I did try a fair amount of different skill combinations, and this is what I found to be a little bit stronger than the rest here. So we have Carve, Biting Jabs, Blazing Spear, Executioner, Rearming Trap, and follows Dawnbreaker. So I did try a few options here. So I tried replacing Biting Jabs with the two-handed spammable Wrecking Blow, and that ended up pulling a little bit worse. I had tried trading out Executioner for a fighter skill ability, and that ended up pulling just a little bit worse as well. So this is going to be the best combination that we have here. And then for our back bar, your standard back bar for a Stamina Templar. So you have Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Restoring Focus, Rearming Trap again, and Empowering Sweep. You can run Ballista if you prefer, but Empowering Sweep is going to be a little bit more better damage per ultimate spent. Going over our champion points next. CP cap is still 810, so we still have 270 points to put across our different constellations. So starting off with green CPs, we have 100 Moon Cap and 75 Tenacity. Leaves 95 remaining points, so we have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. For our blue CPs, we have 44 Master at Arms, 56 Thaumaturge, 61 Precise Strikes, 60 into Piercing, 49 into Mighty. We do need to put a fair amount of points into Piercing here because we only have one of the additional physical penetration armor bonuses. We're not running Sharpened, we're not running Kra'gh, so you do need to put a few more points into Piercing here. So we took the points out of Mighty. Mighty was normally 64 on a dual wield build, so we did have to take those out. And we also took some out of Mastered Arms as well. So Stamina Templars, because we're using Biting Jabs, is one to remain spammable up until Executioner becomes stronger. We do want to put more points into Thaumaturge because it does scale off of Thaumaturge. And our red CPs in classic builds fashion, at least my builds, we go with the balanced approach here. But if you want to maximize mitigation, then you will need to shift some CP points around. So we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. And that's going to be pretty much it for all of the build information. So now let's go ahead and talk about all of the gear, I should say the rotation itself. So just really quickly, this is a static rotation, so very simple, very easy rotation, and it is going to be down in the description below for you guys to kind of take a look at. So we always will start with our back bar, and we always want to pre-buff with Restoring Focus. So starting off on our back bar, you pre-buff with Restoring Focus, then you start off with the Trap. You do 3 Biting Jabs on your front bar, and then you re-up Restoring Focus. Do 3 Biting Jabs again. You end your front bar rotation with Trap. Go to your back bar rotation. And that's the entirety of the rotation right there. So it's always going to be 3 Biting Jabs on the front bar, and you close it off with Rearming Trap, and then you go to your back bar, like so. And you do the exact same thing. Now, you start using Executioner at around 20% health remaining. So because Biting Jabs is a channel, you're only able to get 3 Biting Jabs off, but once you start using Executioner, which is just an instant cast ability, you're able to get 4 Executioners off. So when we do the 21 million dummy parse, you'll see that once we hit around 20% health or so, I swap over from Biting Jabs, Executioner, and I use 4 Executioners. We still finish our front bar rotation with Rearming Trap. And with that, we will be doing our 21 million dummy parse, so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS that we're able to pull, and you can compare this to a dual wield Templar build. You would ideally want to compare it to my own Stamina Templar build, just because obviously people have different skill levels, and I obviously do not main a Stamina Templar as my primary DPS, so just keep that in mind here. Now the parse you see here will be a little bit inflated compared to what you might see in an actual raid, and that's because we are getting 100% major force from the dummy, which obviously is not possible to do in an actual raid environment. So again, You can use this and compare it to other stamina DPS builds. You can compare it to other two-handed builds. Ideally, you want to compare it to my own parses and not necessarily parses from Lyco, because we're at two different levels of DPS. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So we're going to do 3 biting jabs and close our front bar rotation with Rearming trap. You can see here we're running Empowering Sweep. Basically what more or less we're doing is every other back bar rotation we're using our ultimate, and we're going to alternate that with Restoring Focus. You should, if you're using Empowering Sweep as your ultimate, you should be able to get that off every other time you're on your back bar. And just like your standard dual DPS, make sure you're using Poison Injection the last. Make sure your bar swap cancels out that animation. Like so. So biting jabs is a channeled ability, so if you do need to drink potions, you cannot do it while you're in the middle of the channel. If you want to activate synergies, you cannot activate them in the middle of the channel either. You will need to just be mindful of that, and you will need to time it so you take that synergy, you drink your potion after the channel goes through. That button press didn't go through there. So we are past the 50% health threshold, so this is when Executioner starts scaling up in damage. But because jab is actually a very strong spammable, we actually will not be using Executioner until about 20% health or so. So at that point, that's when Executioner ends up doing a little bit more DPS than biting jabs would. So at this point, we're going to start using Executioner. Or we would. I think taking that synergy might have screwed up that rotation there. So we have time for 4 Executioners on our front bar here. And we still close with Rearming Trap. Gonna finish off with spamming that. So there we go, that is the build. I would just have to really quickly get reset dummy, because we will be pulling the combat from a second trap. Alright. So this is the DPS that we're able to pull with a two-handed build. I have managed to hit a little bit higher than this, but not too much higher. This is pretty much where I'm sitting, around 80 to 81k is typically what I was able to hit running a two-handed build here. So we pulled 80.2k. So one of the main reasons why we're still using Biting Jabs and why Biting Jabs is still better than Wrecking Blow is the fact that Biting Jabs also procs Burning Light. So let me see if I can find Wrecking Blow parse. I think it might have been this one. No, this one's still Biting Jabs. Okay, so here's a Wrecking Blow parse. So there has been some variation, obviously, between everything due to crit RNG and things like that. But one of the things with Wrecking Blow is that you can see here it doesn't do quite as much DPS compared to a Biting Jab. So this did 63, 16 DPS compared to Biting Jabs over here, which did 81, 84. But the bigger thing is the Burning Light proc. So we did 59, 39 here, and then with the Wrecking Blow, it's much left further down here. So while this parse itself is a little bit higher, part of that could be explained through just a little bit of crit RNG might have played a little bit of a role there. But overall, Biting Jabs will pull a little bit higher. Remember, this parse, I did have a little bit of trickery there with the shards not necessarily going off. So a little bit of a slow parse here and there. So normally I'd be able to pull a little bit higher. I've been able to pull 81k or so. But the Wrecking Blow parses have been closer to about 80k, 80.5k or so. So Templars, if you compare this to the dual wield build, I believe my dual wield Stamina Templar is pulling about 81k in the video, about 81.2k, 81.3k or something like that. And so this is really close, and part of the reason is because we do get Executioner as our what's it called, as an execute, and Stamina Templars, typically speaking, do not have an execute ability. So introducing that execute does give us a little bit more DPS overall compared to using a two-hander on something like a Stamina Nightblade, which has a class execute already built in. So that's it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about the build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to get back to you at I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Again, hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.